In lesson 13, we are going to continue practicing how to solve quadratic equations using completing the square when you have something other than a 1 as a coefficient. So let's review the steps really quick. All right, if I have to complete the square with a coefficient, leading coefficient, then my first step is, can I find a greatest common factor between the first two terms, or a and b? So in this case, I can. I'm going to factor out the 4, and then I'm going to leave some space in there for my third number. My second step is to divide b by 2. So now that I've pulled out this 4, I'm going to divide the negative 10 by 2 and get a negative 5. Then I'm going to square it. And I want to square it so that I can complete the square. And that is the missing number in my trinomial inside the parentheses. So I'm going to add it so that I can technically complete the square. Now, once I add it, I have to multiply it by the coefficient. So I'm going to multiply 25 times 4, and that is going to give me 100. Now, that 100, I'm going to subtract it. So by doing this, I'm balancing the equation. Whatever you add, you have to subtract. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then I'm going to factor out any trinomials and combine like terms, and we're just going to call that step simplifying. And so I'm going to end up with 4 times, open your parentheses, x minus 5 squared minus 6 equals 0. Now remember, we're not just factoring. This is actually calling for us to solve. So that means we have to give an answer, x equals one thing or the other. So in order to do that, I'm going to make sure that I move all my numbers to the other side. So once I have all my numbers to the other side, I can start working and solving for x. So I'm going to move that 6 first. And when I do that, I'm going to have everything equal to 6. And then I'm going to move this 4. And I can only do that by dividing. So I know I'm going to end up with a fraction on the other side, but at least I have my x minus 5 raised to the exponent of 2 by itself. Now, you could reduce this. You could keep it as 6/4. Either way, you're going to end up with a fraction. Keep it as a fraction. Please do not turn this into a decimal. Last step, you're going to go ahead and solve. So I'm going to get rid of this exponent, and I'm going to take the root. So now I'm going to have x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 3/2. So this is going to give you two possibilities. You're going to have x minus 5 plus the square root of 3/2, or x minus 5 minus the square root of 3/2. And so you can move that 5 to the other side, and you can see both possibilities here. I cannot simplify 3/2, so I'm going to leave them as that. Sometimes you'll have the situation where you have an equation equal to something other than 0. So my suggestion when this happens is just leave it. If your intention is to solve, leave the number on the other side and just start with step 2. So you don't have to move anything around this way. Just divide your b by 2, which is in this case going to give you a negative 1. Square it, add it to complete the square, and then subtract it. You don't have a GCF in this case, so I don't have to do that part. And then you simplify. You're going to get your binomial square there. So it's x minus 1 squared minus 1 equals 12. Then you're going to move all your numbers to the other side, add that 1. Then you're going to take the square root of the binomial x minus 1. So you're going to end up with x minus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 13. When you move that 1 to the other side, you're going to end up with x equals 1 plus square root of 13 or 1 minus square root of 13. I'm going to go ahead and move the steps here so you can do these 3 on your own. Go ahead and pause the video and give it a try. All right, let me go ahead and follow the steps. Step 1, see if I can find a GCF between the first two. In this case, I can. I can find a 1/2, even if it's not apparent that you can do this. You want that leading coefficient to be on 1 under all circumstances. You cannot leave anything there in order to complete the square. So even though it looks like I can't, you actually can. And if you want to rewind the video and see how I took 1/2 out of negative 6, you can please do that. My square is going to be a 36, and I'm going to multiply that by my GCF. And so when you do that, you're basically dividing 36 by 2, and that's going to give you an 18. That is what I'm going to subtract. We're all the way down to step 7 now, and I'm going to simplify this into a square binomial. R minus 6 squared minus 18 equals 2. We're moving on now and moving all the numbers to the other side by adding my 18. So I have 1/2 times r minus 6 squared equals 20. Now I'm going to move that 1/2 by multiplying by the reciprocal, and that's going to give me 40 on the other end, and just leave r minus 6 squared on that end. I'm going to square each side, and I have r minus 6 equal plus or minus square root of 40. Add the 6 to each side, you have r equals plus 6 plus square root of 40 and 6 minus square root of 40. Now, one thing to note is you could simplify this radical even further. If you notice that the factors of 40 are 4 and 10, you can pull out a 2 from that root. If you don't feel comfortable initially doing that, that's fine, but you should eventually, by the end of the year, do that. All right, let's move on to number 3. I pulled out a 7 from the first two terms. My square is going to be a 4. 4 times my GCF2 is going to be an 8, so I'm subtracting an 8. Now I'm all the way down to step 7 and simplifying. Now I'm going to move my numbers to the other side, moving the 8, and then I'm going to move that 2 by dividing the whole thing by 2. That's going to leave me with a fraction. Please keep it as a fraction. Now I'm going to square each side. My final answer is going to be P equals -2 plus 15 halves or -2 minus 15 halves.